What's up guys, it's me Jeremy. The patch 6.5 notes are out, and with every new patch bringing us some buffs and nerfs, comes a bunch of hidden or indirect changes as a result. Just before we start, here are some of my favorite comments where I asked what you guys thought about Bard. Today's question is, what is your favorite change from patch 6.5? As well, I've teamed up with ProGuides.com for the editing on this video. If you're interested in more traditional guides, they have a free trial that gets you full access, so you can check them out and decide for yourself if you like it or not. And if you enjoy the video, hit that like button, and if you don't, hit the dislike. Anyways, let's get started. The first group of champions to receive an indirect buff are poke-oriented supports and AD carries, so things like Lulu, Sona, Ezreal. The reason for this is because of the Soraka nerf. Soraka was always a huge counter to poke champions ever since her rework, since their sustain just overpowers any sort of poke completely that a bot laner might be trying to pull off. It was a really difficult matchup for those kinds of champions who lacked the burst and sustain damage to be able to win an all-in fight, but since the Soraka nerf is pretty big, she's going to see a lot less play and is likely to fall out of the meta, at least a little bit, and even when you do face her in lane, you're certainly going to have an easier time. The next group of champions to receive an indirect buff are Cinderhulk junglers. Devour is receiving a nerf on this patch that's going to make it a lot slower to stack up most of the time, which delays the power spike a lot and even hurts the early game a little bit too. And Cinderhulk junglers struggle a lot versus anyone building Devour, since it's an item that gives both attack speed and on-hit magic damage, providing a huge source of mixed, sustained damage, which is exactly the kind of thing that shreds through a super tank a la a Cinderhulk jungler. Although Devour will definitely still be good, this change is great for Cinderhulk junglers specifically because it gives you a little bit more time to finish an extra tank item before they finally hit their power spike, and also makes them a little bit weaker in the early game before that spike, since they're likely to have less stacks at any given moment early on. And in addition, with the direct buff to Sejuani, maybe it's a good time to try her out again and see if you like her in this meta. The next type of champion who received an indirect buff is squishy all-in champions, so generally assassins like Zed, and maybe a full damage build Akali, with the exception of Talon of course, since he is receiving a pretty significant nerf. This is a product of the buff to Guardian's Angel. Now GA was typically kind of an overrated item on those kinds of champions previously, since it cost a ton of gold and you wouldn't even revive with that much health, since 30% ended up being around 500, maybe 600 health most of the time for you. Now you're going to revive with more health and the item costs 200 gold less, which should have a pretty decent impact, especially the cost reduction, and will allow champions who benefit from the amount of health you revive with change to benefit a lot from building this item now, so those all-in assassins get a tiny bit of a step up, and hey, maybe we'll see the item being bought on some mages like LeBlanc now, as a 5th or 6th item to give additional survivability to go along with Zhonya's. And the last group of champions I could come up with that received an indirect buff are burst mages in the mid lane, especially the immobile ones, so champions like Anymid, Syndra, stuff like that. This occurs as a result of the nerf to Talon, and to a lesser extent Pantheon I guess, although he's not that common of a pick in the mid lane. Talon being super mobile and able to build a Hex Drinker early on, comboed with him also forcing those champions into the suboptimal build path of picking up armor, resulted in him having a really good matchup versus those kinds of champions. But with the Talon nerf, he's likely to see a little bit less play overall now, resulting in you getting a favorable matchup on those kinds of champions a little bit more often. On the flip side, it's also a nerf to the more utility-oriented disengage mages in the mid lane, like Orianna for the same reason. Those kinds of champions did great against Talon because of their utility that brings a lot of counterplay potential, and now Talon is a bit less likely to see play. As well, we're probably going to see an indirect nerf to tank top laners. The Jarvan and Urgot buffs are pretty decent, and those champions both have significant armor shred in their kits, where they do probably have favorable matchups in lane versus most tanks. And with the buffs, they're likely going to see a lot more play, especially up in the top lane, which means that when playing tanks, you're going to see a bad matchup a little bit more often in your games. Alright, next up, let's go through a rundown of what you can expect will go down on patch 6.5. First off, it actually looks like the Kog'Maw nerf is really small and might even be a tiny bit of a buff honestly. So he's still going to be super good and be a top tier champion with a lot of popularity and is still worth a ban in my eyes. Although he lost his attack speed from his W, his attack speed per level went up by a lot, and the W was given some additional damage as a compensation. Now if you take a look at level 9 when you have the W maxed, you're losing 35% of attack speed because of the removal, but if you take into account the bonus attack speed per level, you're only missing out on 19% total attack speed at that point in exchange for 25 on-hit damage. Keep in mind that this on-hit damage is different to his previous minimum damage, which has been removed. Before, the minimum affected his percent health damage so that he didn't lose too much DPS on squishy targets, but this additional damage is more than the minimum damage, so the removal of that wouldn't have mattered anyways at all, and so it's 25 on-hit damage versus 19% attack speed. Well, 19% attack speed is worth 475 gold worth of stats, whereas 25 on-hit damage is roughly worth 875 gold actually if you use attack damage as the stat to measure that. But you have to consider his W active, right? That 19% attack speed it's not really 19%, it's really 38% attack speed. But the 25 on-hit damage also won't get lowered by his W active, since it's just on-hit damage. So that on-hit is also worth more than the 875 gold that 25 attack damage is worth, just like how the attack speed is worth more than 475 gold. But this is just at level 9 when you finally max W. Anything past that and it only gets better because of the attack speed per level improvement. So on paper, it kind of looks like a minor nerf to his super early levels 1 to 4 in lane, and a buff past that, especially in the late game. Now it's probably going to depend a lot on what you build and how you play, but with the Q buff as well, it's hard to make a case for this change being a big nerf, and it might not even be a nerf at all honestly. Although you'd probably have to crunch the numbers a lot more with items and matchups and everything else taken into account, rather than just the raw gold efficiency of the stats. As well, the Jarvan and Urgot buffs are pretty serious, and you should expect to see them see play in solo lanes. Jarvan jungle probably still won't be that strong, but Jarvan and Urgot top lane especially are likely to see significant win rate increases and more play due to the buffs. And with the Renekton buff as well and changes to Pantheon and Nautilus, the top lane meta is going to see the biggest meta shifts of any role on this patch, since such a large amount of champions got direct changes. And the Soraka nerf is probably the biggest nerf on the patch, so if you play her, maybe consider trying someone new, and if you don't, consider banning someone else during champion select. As well, the amount of experience needed to hit level 30 has been cut in half, which is pretty sweet for you guys still leveling up. So if you're still yet to hit level 30, maybe start getting in the mood and realizing that you aren't that far away from being able to play ranked. And that's just about it. If you enjoyed the video, subscribe if you want. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys next time.